Hi, welcome to the first day of Peaceful Pathways, a serene environment focused on cultivating relaxation, mindfulness, acceptance, and awareness. I'm Michelle, your guide along the path. I'm a mental health therapist with over 14 years of experience, an aspiring author, currently querying agents, a peacemaker, and an advocate for those without a voice. Today, we will be discussing stress, including the stress response, effects of stress, and how to assess it. So, we're going to be starting off with a card from the Rethink Affirmation Cards for Mindful Life and Daily Actions deck. For day one, the card that I drew for us is Embracing Vulnerability. And that says, welcoming the raw beauty of vulnerability, I fearlessly invite new experiences and connections into my life. With unwavering courage, I allow myself to be seen and heard, understanding that true connection blossoms in the space of vulnerability. All right. So, hopefully, throughout this process, we will allow ourselves to be vulnerable because there is a beauty involved with opening ourselves up to connections, to experiences. So, on that note, let's go ahead and get started with the material. So, as I said, we're going to be focusing on understanding stress today. We'll be defining stress and its impact, the major causes of stress, the stress response in the central nervous system, effects on our physical and mental health as a result of stress. And then the assessment portion, we'll be looking at the Holmes Rahe stress inventory. All right. So, on that note, we will be defining stress and the impact it has on us. And please enjoy the PowerPoint that's in the background. So, stress is the body's reaction to any sort of perceived threat. It causes changes in our mind and our body. Those perceived threats are referred to as triggers. Those can be things that are external or outside of our body. They're things that happen in our environment, or they can even be internal, which means they're inside of us. So, maybe if we think about a memory, then that can trigger potential stress. And then we all have our individual stress responses as well, even though stress, as we'll find out, is involves a biological process. We do still have some individual responses. So, some people tend to respond differently to different situations. Their coping mechanisms tend to be different. So, we can respond in different ways, um, depending on who we are, what we've learned in our life. There are a lot of impacts of stress on our mind and body. So, in the short term, stress can actually be beneficial. It can help to increase focus, increase our energy. It improves our performance in challenging situations. So, there are definitely some benefits to stress when it's not chronic. So when something happens very briefly, what we refer to as acute, that can actually benefit us. Versus when we experience chronic stress or a stressful living environment, a stressful work environment where we're under a lot of pressure, that can lead to some long-term health risks. So, some of those, in a nutshell, and we'll be talking more about them as well, are things like anxiety, depression, and With our physical health, it can definitely impact our cardiovascular health and well-being. And obviously, if we're having some cardiovascular responses to stress, we want to be aware of those and engage in intervention to address those. So, how do we recognize stress on a day-to-day basis? There are some emotional signs. Irritability is a common indicator of stress. And then there can also be a cognitive impact, like having difficulty concentrating. That difficulty focusing can reduce productivity and our focus when we're experiencing stress. And then, as I've mentioned, there's also physical symptoms like fatigue, headaches, which definitely impact our health and well-being. Sometimes people don't recognize that they're experiencing stress too. So it is important to be mindful of these symptoms to be able to recognize when we're under stress so we can engage in interventions accordingly. What causes stress? This is somewhat different for everybody, but like I talked about earlier, we all have different responses, different stressors, different triggers. But in general, there are some environmental factors. These are the external factors, the things that are outside of us. So, some noise pollution, having or experiencing excessive noise in the environment that you live in can cause stress and affect our mental well-being. Some people experience crowd stress. This could happen in crowded spaces, sporting events, concerts, as well as communities with a high population. Then any environmental pollution can contribute to chronic stress and health risks. That could include things like pollution of the air around us, water, and land. And then work demands can also contribute to stress, especially if there's a lot of pressure in the environment or we're expected to get a lot done in a short amount of time. So, as I mentioned, we can also have what's referred to as internal triggers, those things that are happening inside of us. So, we may have high expectations for ourselves that contributes to stress. We may place unrealistic demands and pressure on ourselves that are unrealistic, and that negatively impacts our well-being. Personality traits can also impact stress. Type A personalities tend to be more prone to stress. Type A personalities are individuals who tend to be very organized, structured. They do have high expectations of themselves. They're self-disciplined. They want to do things properly. So unfortunately, that those things that can be strengths and often are can also negatively impact us if we're not utilizing these techniques that peaceful pathways will be laying out for us. And then mental health conditions can also contribute to triggers. For example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that can develop after an extremely stressful event, what's referred to as a traumatic event. So individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, tend to have like a heightened stress response. And then life events also impact our stress level. We'll be assessing those life events at the end of today. So, things that even cause good change, so like marriage, can actually impact the amount of stress that we experience on a day-to-day basis. So, other things are like job loss, illnesses, divorce. And on the inventory, every life event is given a corresponding number that tells you the level of stress that that event can have on your physical well-being. So again, we will revisit the Holmes Rahi stress inventory in a few minutes to be able to assess our stress. But the purpose right now is to know that life events are stressors and they trigger that stress response. So now we'll talk about what is that stress response in relation to our central nervous system. So when we see or experience something that is stressful to us, a stress or a trigger, our central nervous system perceives that and processes it. So it one of the brain areas of the brain that's involved is called the hypothalamus, and that's the control center of the stress response. So the automatic nervous system is activated and prepares the body for the stress response. And then the endocrine system then releases hormones to prepare the body to respond to the stressful situation. So, what happens with hormones during stress is the body releases two well-known stress hormones. Adrenaline is pretty widely known. So, when we experience stress, adrenaline is that chemical that really creates almost a superhuman strength at certain points in time. That's how it's known. For example, a child ends up with a car on it. There are stories where moms are able to lift up the car to get their child out from under it safely. And that's due to the release of adrenaline in the body. Then another one that's been getting more attention lately, so you may have heard of this, you may not have, is cortisol. So cortisol is also released in the body, and that's one of the stress hormones that leads to some negative health impacts if stress isn't addressed and responded to in healthy ways. So what those chemicals do, and also the as the energy transmission, the neural response, so our brain, our nervous system sends signals. The signals that are sent throughout the body when we experience stress tend to elevate our heart rate and our energy supply. And as we talked about, those stress hormones can have negative impacts on our body if we experience them chronically. Okay, so as we talked about some of the nervous system, so one path of the nervous system is the fight, flight, and freeze response. It's definitely a survival mechanism. We need it to live. We developed this stress response back in the early days of humans when we needed to run away from bears or lions, getting away from predators. And that's stayed with us over time to be able to still respond during those times of stress. So, in the fight response, we tend to confront those threats aggressively. So, we may fight back during situations that may involve hitting, kicking. We may use some aggressive language. Whatever happens to fight in response to stress. And then another response when this pathway is triggered is the flight response. which involves escaping to avoid danger to protect oneself. So basically, this is when we experience stress. We don't want to deal with it, so we run away from it. And that may not be literally running away nowadays, but it may present itself through avoidance. And then freeze is when we freeze like a deer in the headlights. We can't move, we can't say anything, we just freeze in place. So that can be a response to stress as well. Before we move on to the next section, so this fight, flight, or freeze response is one half of that stress response. When the threat is removed from the environment, maybe we see a bear that triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response, and then the bear moves on and we're left unharmed. So then the next system is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's responsible for calming us down. So that system is referred to the rest and digest system because it allows the body to return to homeostasis, to that place of calm and relaxation. Our heart rate lowers, our blood pressure lowers, and we're back to a state of peace. So, what all of the strategies we're going to be learning throughout Peaceful Pathways allow ourselves to experience the relaxation of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that way we can start to rest and digest again. All right. So, what happens when we don't manage stress in healthy ways? As I mentioned, our heart rate is increased. It That's a response to prepare the body for immediate reaction. Our muscles tense up if we're in a constant state of stress, that then we don't relax our muscles back, so they just stay in that tightened state. And we also have heightened alertness, and that allows us to pay attention to our environment so we can respond to the threat in the best way possible. So, long-term health consequences, we can experience things like hypertension, which is high blood pressure over time that increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. We can actually experience a weakened immune response. So, chronic stress is related to illnesses that impact our immune system. And that reduces our body's ability to fight infections in an effective way. And then it also contributes to mental health disorders like anxiety and depression. So, what do we do to manage stress in a healthy way? And that way, we don't experience all of the potentially harmful effects of stress. So, we can engage in relaxation techniques that we'll learn one of those tomorrow during our session. Here, we can do relaxation techniques like deep breathing, meditation, and that effectively reduces stress when we incorporate those into our daily routine. Engaging in regular physical activity, exercise, also reduces stress. Having social support, so making sure that we're connecting with friends and family and receiving the emotional support that we need helps reduce stress. And then we can also seek professional help, such as medication, talking to your medical doctor about some medications that can help with stress, and also potentially seeing a mental health therapist to help learn these techniques and also some other ones that can go a little bit more in depth to help you manage your stress in healthy ways. All right, so we are back to the home's Reiki stress inventory. So, as I talked about briefly earlier, It assesses our life events and gives it a corresponding stress score. So then we add up our total scores to see the impact the stress has on our life. It also lets us know if we have any potential health risks due to the amount of stress that we're experiencing related to the life events that have happened within the last 12 months. So, as I talked about, there is a correlation between the scores on the assessment and your risk of illness. Higher stress or more stressful life events relates to a higher score, which is associated with potential health concerns. So this inventory helps identify people, even yourself, who may need to incorporate some interventions to be able to manage and reduce the impact of stress. And then, as far as how it helps us to screen, like I said, to identify if we are experiencing more stress than maybe we realize that we're experiencing. There are some difficulties with individual differences because, as I've mentioned also earlier, each individual has different coping mechanisms. So, someone may be experiencing a high level of stressful life events, but they're really managing those events well. And then also, it can help to get some clinical judgment and not just take this score and assume that you're going to have some serious health events because of your stress. So, a mental health professional, psychologist, therapist can look at your score and look at other aspects of your life to really see if you're at risk from stress and also develop a treatment plan that can help you to manage that stress in a healthy way. All right. So, as we sum up our first day together, we worked on understanding stress, including the causes and effects of stress, so that way we can manage our mental health and physical health better. We looked at the home's Reiki inventory, and we also discussed some brief coping strategies that can be implemented to help us manage stress in a healthy way. Well, thank you for being here today. I do want to share that our monthly healing sanctuary is scheduled on September 27th from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. Central Time, and that is for paid subscribers. We come together monthly to identify strategies in a warm and supportive community. Um, we encourage things like mindfulness, connection, personal growth through things like guided practices, reflective exercises, and opportunities to share. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. If you'd like to participate in the Healing Sanctuary, the live class on Saturday, just upgrade your subscription to be a paid subscriber, and you'll be receiving a Zoom link for that morning. All right. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.